Now in our 25th year, a quarter of a century of service to the worldwide amateur radio community, we are This Week in Amateur Radio, your all-amateur radio and technology news magazine and bulletin service of the air. This is edition number 1339 with a release and air date of Saturday, October 26, 2024. Please take the program to your air following the cue tone.
Heard on the air on the amateur bands all around the world, and distributed in file and streaming platforms across the internet, serving the amateur radio community with weekly, reliable, amateur radio news and special features since 1993, we are This Week in Amateur Radio, the worldwide premier amateur radio and technology news magazine and bulletin service of the air. Here are the stories for release around the earth as we come to air with edition number 1339 of This Week in Amateur Radio. A helicopter carrying 4 people collides with a radio tower in Texas. We will have a full report. Intelsat 33E explodes while in active geostationary orbit. A shortwave broadcaster in Austria faces an end-of-year shutdown. The 2024 edition of PacificCon inspires the next generation of radio amateurs. One of the last remaining World War II Navajo code talkers becomes a silent key. The 86th anniversary of Orson Welles' War of the World broadcast is celebrated with a special event station. The International Amateur Radio Union is gearing up to celebrate its centenary in 2025. NASA's Europa Clipper embarks on its epic journey to explore an alien ocean world. The Wireless Institute of Australia seeks to harmonize the 40-meter band around the world. The FCC fines ESPN, we will tell you why. And amateurs in New Zealand put volcanoes on the air. All of this and a lot more are straight ahead in this week's edition of This Week in Amateur Radio. These headline stories will come to you in a moment, along with this week's special features. We'll visit with Bruce Page, KK5DO, and get an update from AMSAT and what's new with all those amateur satellites in orbit. Australia's own Onno Benschop, Phi K6FLAB, and Foundations of Amateur Radio will be here to tell us how amateur radio connects us in unexpected ways. Our own amateur radio historian, Will Rogers, K5WLR, returns with another edition of A Century of Amateur Radio. This week, Will puts us all into the Wayback Machine to the early 1900s. In a segment Will calls The Lid, it's war in 1916 and amateurs across the country are totally shut down, both transmitting and receiving by the government. We will stop by and visit with Bill Saliers, AJ8B in the DX Corner, with all the latest news on D expeditions, DX, upcoming radio sport contests, and more. That's all straight ahead as North America's premier amateur radio and technology news magazine and bulletin service, This Week in Amateur Radio, takes to the air right now. Reporting from our headquarters studio where we are still experiencing warmer than normal temperatures for this time of year, this is W2XBS.
And reporting from our news bureau in Salem, Ohio, this is Denny Haight, NZ8D.
And reporting from our news bureau in Rochester, New York, I'm Dave Wilson, WA2HOY.
And reporting from our news bureau in Dallas, Texas, where we're still waiting for fall weather to arrive, I'm Tammy, KI5ODE.
And recording from our live DXpedition here in Port Villa, Vanuatu, where I'm getting ready for the DXCC sideband contest, I'm Savo, YJ0SA.
And reporting from our news bureau in Knoxville, Tennessee, in the shadow of the colorful Great Smoky Mountains National Park, I'm Josh Marler, AA4WX.
And reporting from a brisk Troy, New York news bureau, I'm Eric, KD2RJX.
And reporting from our amateur radio outpost in the Catskill Mountains of upstate New York, where everybody's getting ready for Pumpkin Night, I'm Don Hulick, K2ATJ.
And reporting from our news bureau in Fayetteville, Arkansas, where summer is still hanging around, even though the leaves are changing colors, I'm Will Rogers, K5WLR.
And now, with our lead story, here is Denny Haight, NZ8D.
Leading off our news this week, 4 people are dead after a private helicopter struck a broadcast tower in Houston, Texas, this past Sunday evening. The website of Radio Insight reports that the tower served several broadcast stations, including Univision FM stations, KLTN and KAMA, as well as Pueblo de Galilea station KCOH. CNN reported that 4 people, including a child, were killed in the accident in Houston's 2nd Ward that caused a fiery explosion and toppled the structure near Engelke Street and North Ennis Street just before 8 p.m. Sunday. CNN affiliate KTRK quoted the city police chief confirming the deaths. SBA Communications owns the structure, which was almost 1,000 feet tall. Univision had owned it until recently. A senior spokesman for Univision said that it had been sold along with several other towers in September. Various media reports said that no one on the ground was injured, either from the fiery crash or the subsequent collapse of the tower on Sunday, October 20th. The city's mayor, John Whitmire, told local media that it was fortunate that the tower, which had guy wires, collapsed instead of toppling over. The mayor said that the explosion set off by the crash was like a fireball out of the air. Houston's ABC 13 News said that the tower was equipped with red flashing lights designed to make it visible to aircraft, but the lights had a history of malfunctioning. KHOU Channel 11 said that the lights were reported as not working on the 16th of October. Local television meteorologist Pat Kavlin, a pilot, had posted on social media shortly after the crash that a Notice to Air Missions, or NOTAM, had been filed for this tower reporting that its lights were not operable. However, on Monday, SBA Communications issued a statement. Without referring to a specific post, SBA spokesperson Lynn Hopkins wrote in an email that there had unfortunately been some incomplete or inaccurate information provided. Hopkins said NOTAMs filed with the FAA are to inform pilots of work notices, potential hazards, or changes that may impact their flight. These types of notifications are to provide pilots information and direction to be cautious of a specific location and may be filed for a variety of reasons. This specific site was recently acquired by SBA on September 6, 2024. As part of our standard process for newly acquired sites, SBA ensured a NOTAM was in place for the site in order to exercise caution during the change of ownership while we integrate the site into our Network Operations Center for continuous 24/7 monitoring pursuant to FAA and FCC regulations. The statement did not explicitly say what the condition of the tower lights had been. This is an ongoing investigation led by federal officials. We are limited in the information that we can disclose at this time. Additional information will be provided as it becomes available. The National Transportation Safety Board is leading the investigation.
The Intelsat 33E satellite has broken up in geostationary orbit and lost power, ceasing communication services for customers across Europe, Africa, and parts of Asia-Pacific. Intelsat said in an October 19th news release it was working with satellite maker Bowen to address an anomaly that emerged earlier that day, but added it was unlikely that the satellite will be recoverable. In an October 21st update, Intelsat declared the satellite a total loss. The company said it is working with government agencies to analyze data and observations, and has set up a failure review board to investigate the anomaly's cause. An Intelsat spokesperson said the satellite was not insured at the time of the issue. The United States Space Force reported on October 19th that it was tracking around 20 pieces of debris associated with the spacecraft. U.S. Space Forces confirmed the breakup of Intelsat 33E in geostationary on October 19, 2024, at approximately 0430 UTC, stated an alert posted on SpaceTrack, the U.S. Department of Defense's space tracking platform. Currently tracking around 20 associated pieces, analysis ongoing. Space Force has observed no immediate threats and is continuing to conduct routine conjunction assessments to support the safety and sustainability of the space domain. Douglas Hendricks, CEO of Exoanalytics Solutions, said the U.S.-based space tracking company identified 57 pieces of debris October 21st associated with the breakup. We are warning operators of any spacecraft that we think are at risk of collision, Hendricks said via email. Intelsat said it is working to move customers to other satellites in Intelsat's fleet of spacecraft operated by third parties. Intelsat 33E launched in August 2016 and entered service in January 2017 at 60 degrees east, about 3 months later than planned following an issue with its primary thruster. A second propulsion issue that emerged during in-orbit tests helped knock off around 3.5 years from the satellite's initially estimated 15-year lifespan. Intelsat 33E is the second in Intelsat's epic next-generation series of high-throughput satellites. The first, Intelsat 29E, was declared a total loss in 2019 after just 3 years in orbit. That failure was pinned on either a meteoroid impact or a wiring flaw that led to an electrostatic discharge following heightened solar weather activity.
Now, in our 25th year of service to the worldwide amateur radio community, you are listening to This Week in Amateur Radio.
After weeks of speculation, Austria's ORS shortwave radio station confirmed that its shutdown date will be December 31st. The news came to the German National Ham Radio Society's weekly Radio DARC program on October 14th. The station recently lost its major broadcast client, Adventist World Radio, which will end its transmissions this month. That leaves only a handful of customers for the ORS station, including Radio DARC, for whom it carried a special worldwide broadcast of the World Radio Sport Team Championship in 2018. The shortwave site was formerly the Radio Austria International Broadcast Station and is well known for having had Europe's largest directional antenna system for shortwave broadcasts. Various news reports, including those from Radio DARC in Germany and the British DX Club, had said that the Moosbrunn site was likely to be shut down by the 31st of December. ORS is among the few remaining shortwave broadcasters in Europe and has provided programming for listeners in the Near East, the Middle East, and Africa.
The Mount Diablo Amateur Radio Club held its successful convention, Pacificon 2024, in San Ramon, California, October 18th through the 20th. With more on this active annual convention, we go to John Ross, KD8IDJ, who files this special report.
The convention drew radio amateurs from throughout the populous Bay Area of California and beyond, and annually hosts the ARRL Pacific Division Convention. The organizing committee works all year long on pulling together an impressive program. This year included an exceptional lineup of forums, seminars, hands-on activities, and exhibits. But the standout this year was the tremendous effort to include and engage young hams and prospective hams. Pacificon coincided with the largest scouting event in the world, Jamboree on the Air and Jamboree on the Internet. As radio amateurs and radio clubs around the world got scouts on the air to promote friendship and global citizenship, Pacificon partnered with the Boy Scouts of America Golden Gate Area Council to get dozens of scouts to attend the convention. The scouts were led by their troop leaders in small groups to meet with ARRL Education and Learning Manager Steve Goodgame, K5ATA, and his wife Cindy Goodgame, K5CYN, for a short introduction to radio and wireless technology, ham radio, and ARRL. The Scouts also got on the air using the most recognized call sign in the world, W1AW. Special event station W1AW/6 was sponsored by the Palo Alto Amateur Radio Association. Many young hams also attended, including those accompanying parents and grandparents. Among them was ARRL East Bay Section Youth Coordinator Alexis Snethen, KM6LGG, a 17-year-old from Alameda County, and San Joaquin Valley Youth Coordinator Shane Lewis, K5SML, both youth coordinators and general class licensees, and they are involved in a variety of activities throughout their sections to attract and engage more young hams. For instance, Snethen runs a youth net on a local repeater and helps students in her section connect with each other, even online, to discuss ham radio. Thanks to Bob Interbitson, NQ1R, ARRL Director of Marketing and Innovation, for contributing this story. I'm John Ross, KD8IDJ.
Another activity attracting participation from all ages included the Parachute Mobile Team. Pacificon attendees enjoyed making short contacts with the jumpers, who included Mark Meltzer, AF6IM, Rob Fenn, KC6TYD, and Dmitry Kalugan-Balashov, KN6MMW. Their motto was "In the Air, on the Air." ARRL member Brian Zoroaster, KA6ZED of Livermore, California, helped organize a fox hunt for Pacificon. Set up under a tent outside, participants were quickly briefed by Zoroaster on techniques to use handheld radios S-meters, and directional antennas to find transmitters that he hid in the San Ramon Marriott Hotel property. ARRL National Instructor Gordon West, WB6NOA, was on hand to greet attendees and to congratulate new licensees and those who recently earned upgrades. West led Instructors Academy during the convention, sharing ideas for instructional demonstrations and highlighting ARRL resources for teaching amateur radio class. Pacificon also organized 2 vendor halls filled with manufacturers and resellers and welcomed many radio clubs and organizations to connect with attendees. In his address to members at Pacificon, CEO David Minster, NA2AA, highlighted ARRL's efforts to develop a new advocacy called Inspiring Youth. "We have to build a bridge across the digital divide," he said, describing the impact from ARRL's Teachers Institute, which brings both radio technology and community building into the lives of students and schools. A photo album of the ARRL Facebook page captures more of this convention's highlights. Pacificon returns next year, Friday, October 10 to Sunday, October 12th in 2025. We thank Bob Interbidson, NQ1R, ARRL Director of Marketing and Innovation, for this story.
One of the 3 remaining World War II veterans known as Navajo Code Talkers has died. John Kinsell, Sr., died in his sleep at his Arizona home on Saturday, October 19th. He served the United States military in the elite group of Marines who use their native language as the basis of a code to securely transmit troop movement information and other critical messages. The code was never broken by the enemy. According to various news reports, with his death, only 2 of the original Navajo Code Talkers remain. John Kinsell Sr. was 107 years old.
Come work us as we tune up and get ready for the upcoming contest. We will be operating as YJ0VV for the CQ Worldwide DX Sideband Contest from 0 UTC October 26 to 2359 UTC October 27th. We will be operating in CQ Zone 32.
The FCC has proposed a fine of $146,976 against ESPN for 6 violations of the Emergency Alert System rules. The agency cited an ESPN promo for the start of the 2023-24 NBA season that transmitted emergency signals. Agency rules prohibit such transmissions in an absence of an actual emergency. Loyan A. Igal, the FCC's Enforcement Bureau chief, said in a statement, quote, "These types of violations can raise substantial public safety concerns by causing confusion and in some cases interfering with the legitimate emergency use. Today's proposed fine reflects the FCC's commitment to keep the lines clear when it comes to proper use of tools that broadcasters are entrusted with to assist the public during an emergency." According to the FCC, ESPN acknowledged that it transmitted a promo spot a total of 6 times during October 20 through the 24th of 2023 on 2 ESPN-owned networks. The agency said ESPN has a history of non-compliance with the emergency system rules, noting fines in 2015 and 2021. Those previous violations played a factor in the agency seeking the maximum allowed fines for the latest incident.
A story that takes us to International Amateur Radio Union Region 3, where a study of the 40-meter band's varied allocations has produced a proposal to harmonize the band. The recommendations could ultimately have a far-reaching effect to even broader harmonization with IARU Regions 1 and 2. Following the 40-meter band plan harmonization consultation conducted by the Wireless Institute of Australia, discussions have taken place within the International Amateur Radio Union 3 HF Band Plan Committee over the WIA findings. The IARU Region 3 Subcommittee has now taken into consideration the work of the WIA and has decided that it would be beneficial to all if the Region 3 Subcommittee deliver the new IARU perspective paper directly into the IARU Region 3 Conference to be held in Thailand this coming November. This approach was proposed so that all member societies can engage freely in discussion on the proposals at the conference, including the WIA, based on whatever local feedback they receive. For the WIA, it means that they will not be directly proposing the changes to the conference, thus giving them more freedom at the conference to act in the best interests of all radio amateurs in Australia. The IARU's proposal is the result of a recent consultation by the Wireless Institute of Australia with the goal of finding band plans for various modes that could ultimately form the basis of a global agreement. The committee noted in its report that one of its biggest challenges was to settle on an equitable redistribution of use of the spectrum based on activity and demand within the various modes. The proposal noted that very little spectrum is set aside for the digital modes and discusses the potential use of channelization of the bands for digital modes. To deal with the challenge of allocations that include SSB and CW, the committee studied, among other things, activity shown on Club Log. In addition to its intent to change some things, the committee reaffirmed the need to retain certain long-standing rules: the start of CW operation from the bottom of the band, and SSB operation from the top, with data modes occupying the boundary area between the two. The proposal asks for accommodations for emergency traffic so as to limit the possibility of QRM from other amateur activity. The WIA therefore invites its members and interested radio amateurs in Australia to provide feedback on the new IARU Region 3 paper to WIA, which can then be taken forth to the conference. Amateurs in other countries within Region 3 should do likewise through their regional IARU member associations.
You're listening to North America's premier amateur radio and technology news magazine of the air. We are This Week in Amateur Radio, distributed worldwide at twiar.net.
The Nashua Area Radio Society in New Hampshire will be holding an online ham boot camp on Saturday, November the 9th, 2024, from 10 a.m. to 6 p.m. Eastern Time. The ham boot camp program includes a series of demonstrations and tutorials designed to help new, inactive, and prospective hams gain the skills and information needed to get on the air. It is open to any interested ham or prospective ham in the United States and Canada, and there is no charge to attend. Ham boot camp activities are provided online via a series of sessions geared toward technician class licensees, prospective hams, general class licensees, and higher. Boot camp participants will find all of the material interesting and fun, no matter what their focus or license level is. The online boot camp program is available to all licensed and prospective hams. For questions or additional information, contact bootcamp@n1fd.org.
The International Amateur Radio Union celebrates its centenary in 2025. Since its founding in France, the IARU has worked tirelessly to promote innovation in amateur radio and to encourage the growth of the service in communities throughout the world. The IARU has represented the amateur services at international and regional regulatory bodies by relying on volunteers who come from many countries and communities. The IARU has been a sector member of the International Telecommunications Union since 1932, and the work of volunteers has continued since that date, with unmatched success as was highlighted with accomplishments at World Radio Conference 2023. Leading up to the IARU centenary year, we should take time to reflect on the remarkable achievements of radio amateurs over the last 100 years. While the amateur services have been in operation for over a century, 1924 was the first year that transcontinental amateur communication became more or less commonplace. Since that time, radio amateurs have made unparalleled advances in technology related to the amateur services that play a critical role today in sustaining worldwide communications and allow us to respond to global emergencies. Another IARU special call operating is HS-19 IARU, active between October 12th and November 10th for the 19th IARU Region 3 Conference, hosted in Bangkok by the Radio Amateur Society of Thailand on November 4th through the 8th.
The ARRL Handbook is your complete guide to wireless technology, experimentation, practice, and development, capturing the state of radio science and technology in one authoritative work for nearly 100 years. John Ross, KD8 IDJ, has more.
Use its more than 1,200 pages of amateur radio know-how to delve into radio electronics, circuit design, digital modulation and techniques, and equipment construction. The 101st edition proudly introduces a new editor, Gregory D. Lapin, Ph.D., P.E., and 9GL. Greg and his team of subject matter experts in the community bring a fresh perspective and new outlook on the future of amateur radio. They have revised entire chapters on radio fundamentals, transmission lines, general safety, assembling a station, and more. Major updates to Handbook 101 include information on electromagnetic analysis and inexpensive tools for modeling circuits, antennas, and propagation. New material on higher-level modeling of transmitters and receivers. A new section on preparing your station for emergency operation. Radio astronomy receiver and antenna design information, plus many more interesting topics. Handbook 101 comes with a bonus ebook download. The download contains a wealth of online content and includes the fully searchable digital edition of the printed book, plus expanded and supplemental content, software, PC board templates, and other support files. I'm John Ross, KD8IDJ.
Whether you're an experienced ham or new to the hobby, you'll find information you can use in the ARRL Handbook. Like handbook editor Gregory Lapin, N9GL, said about the first handbook he owned, that edition was half the size of the current handbook, and I was never able to read it from cover to cover. I have had many editions since then, and have never read every word in it until this year. Regardless, it has always been one of the great references on my bookshelf. I refer to it often. I hope you enjoy the 101st edition and gain lots of knowledge to help our hobby continue moving forward into the next century and beyond.
On Wednesday, October 23rd, the ARRL issued its newest update on its system service disruption from the cyber attack that occurred earlier this year. The ARRL DXCC system has been returned to service, and our staff is again processing applications for credit toward DXCC awards. The queue includes nearly 3,000 award applications submitted via Logbook of the World accounts and mailed paper applications. We are processing the backlog as quickly as possible and will provide additional progress updates. For now, the online DXCC application will remain offline. Any new award applications we receive will experience significant delays as we work through the backlog. As previously reported, Logbook of the World was returned to service on Monday, July 1st, 2024. Since then, the system has been processing log uploads with little or no processing delay. We are grateful for your continued patience and understanding as we continue to make progress on the few remaining services that have required additional attention to bring back online.
The 5th Annual Youth Dream Rig Essay Contest has begun to accept submissions. John Ross, KD8IDJ, has all the details.
The contest is sponsored by the Intrepid DX Group, a U.S.-based 501c3 nonprofit organization that promotes amateur radio activities around the world and recognizes the importance of including youth in the amateur radio hobby. Contestants must be a USA citizen or Canadian amateur radio license holders aged 19 or younger. All contestants must be in the U.S., including territories or Canada. And they must write a 2-page essay answering the following question. What do you see as ham radio's place in society? How can it benefit our society and at the same time become attractive to others your age? The essay in plain text, PDF, or MS Word attachment should be sent to the Intrepid DX Group at gmail.com, or you can mail it to the Intrepid DX Group, 3052 Wetmore Drive, San Jose, California, 95148. Entries must be postmarked, though, by November 30th, 2024. Those who have previously submitted an essay may still compete in this year's contest, as long as all of the other requirements are met. The first place prize is an ICOM IC7300 transceiver. Second place prize is an ICOM ID5 5100 AD dual band mobile radio with D-Star. And the third place prize is an ICOM IC10D dual band handheld. All entrants and winners must promise to keep the radios for 1 year without flipping, trading, or selling them, and to use the radios on the air. The winners of the essay contest will be announced on the Intrepid DX Group's website and Facebook page on December 15th, 2024, and they must agree to provide a photo along with their prize. I'm John Ross, KD8IDJ.
All submissions become property of the Intrepid DX Group, and the winners authorize Intrepid DX Group to use their photographs to promote the contests. For additional questions or information, email intrepiddxgroup@gmail.com.
The Delaware Valley Radio Association will be marking the 86th anniversary of the Orson Welles broadcast of The War of the Worlds on October 30, 1938, with special event station W0W. In the broadcast, Martian invaders first landed in Grover's Mill, New Jersey. The Delaware Valley Radio Association will be operating special event station W0W on 7.255, 14.255, and 21.300 megahertz Sunday, October 27, 2024, from 12 o'clock to 5 o'clock p.m. in Van Nest Park, located in Grover's Mill. This will be a rain or shine event. Setup will be under the picnic pavilion in the park. Stop by to help operate the station or just to check out the action. DVRA also needs folks to help operate W0W, as well as setting up and taking down the station before and after the event. 2 amateurs will be operating the station, one on the microphone and the second doing the logging, in half-hour shifts. If anyone wishes to operate CW, please bring your own spray key, bug, or paddles. CW ops will need to do your own logging. A certificate and QSL card will be available.
You are listening to North America's premier news and information service for the amateur radio hobbyist. We are This Week in Amateur Radio.
Coming up, This Week in Amateur Radio is presenting another chapter of A Century of Amateur Radio, hams, organizations, events, inventions, from the mind of Chris Cordella, W2PA, and his editing team. Each episode will bring a different aspect of early amateur radio history. Coming up here on This Week in Amateur Radio.
Hello and welcome to the DX Corner for your weekly dose of DX. I'm Bill, AJ8B. I'm actually operating Portable 4 in Florida, helping my in-laws clean up after the hurricane that came through. Fortunately, they survived it okay, but I know a lot of other folks didn't, so our thoughts and prayers are with those. I received an email from Janet, W8CAA. Janet asked, on 2 of your podcasts, you've had Ralph, K9ZO, as a guest. He knows so much about the various DX entities. Where does he get all of this information? There are just so many sources out there, I'm not sure which ones to use. Well, Janet, that's a great question. And coincidentally, starting in 2025, I will have a featured country each week and will share details about upcoming DXpeditions. I know you will enjoy that. And at that time, I'll tell you where I'm getting the information, because there's one tremendous source. And that'll allow us to not only track the upcoming DXpeditions, but every week it'll give us some focus on a new one that maybe we can all learn about. So thank you for that. If you have questions, please send me an email at thedxmentor@gmail.com. If I don't know the answer, I will find it, or I'll refer you to another source. Often people will ask me if there is a written copy of the information that is presented here. There are so many call signs, dates, and URLs being discussed, you could never remember them until such time as you could write them down. I use most of the same data that you hear in the DX Corner for the weekly DX column in the Ohio Section Journal. If you just Google ARRL Ohio Section, you will find the Ohio Section website, and you can subscribe to the weekly journal and get most of this information. The actual website is arrl-ohio.org. This is a free journal, and you don't need to be an ARRL member to receive it. You won't get the well-rounded information that you get from the This Week in Amateur Radio podcast, but you will get the DX information. So here's what's happening in the world of DX. This section of DX News comes from Bernie, W3UR, editor of the Daily DX, the Weekly DX, and the How's DX column in QST. If you would like to receive a free 2-week trial of the Daily DX, your only source of real-time DX information, just drop me a note at thedxmentor@gmail.com. So we're starting off with a couple of items about Rotuma in the Fiji Islands. 3 Delta 2 Alpha Golf Antoine was scheduled to sail to Rotuma on the evening of October 19th, quote, via the monthly franchise run for a research-related trip lasting 3 to 4 weeks, depending on the timing of the return boat in November, end quote. Once on the island, he will be QRV as 3 Delta 2 Alpha Golf /P in his spare time. He will emphasize the high bands. Antoine will have an ICOM IC7300 and an IC706 Mark IIG, along with an ACOM 600S for 600 watts CW and sideband. His antennas will include a 5-element spider beam for 20 to 10 meters, an 18-meter high inverted L for 160 through 80 meters. He will also have inverted Vs for 60, 40, and 30, and a 5-element Cushcraft A50-5S for 6 meters. He will be using a 3.5 kilovolt diesel generator and solar panel for digital modes running 35 watts. Antoine will usually be at the low end of the bands for both CW and sideband, but that will also, quote, depend on QRM and other expeditions. He will not have access to the internet, so he will not take skeds, post logs, or monitor the DX spotting network. 3 Delta 2 Alpha Golf Stroke P hopes to be up and running by October 25th and plans to participate in the CQ Worldwide DX Contest single sideband. And he will confirm QSOs via club log and OQRS and LOTW. Here's another example of things that we don't think about sitting at home working DXpeditions. The Rebel DX group operation on Rotuma Island as 3 Delta 2U and 3 Delta 2V came to an end last week because of a, quote, hectic storm, end quote, that buffeted the island and created unsafe conditions for the team and for their sea vessel. As of late this week, the team was stuck in the harbor with very bad weather conditions and massive roller coaster waves. They returned to Fiji, a 60-hour boat trip, earlier today. So oftentimes we're sitting in our basements or our rooms frustrated that we can't get them on a certain band or mode. And many times they're facing life-threatening or even worse situations. So here's a group of guys that sounds like they had to cut it short, but they were lucky to get out. The Dateline DX Association S9 Zulu team is preparing for its trip to San Tome and Principe, November 10th to the 20th. They've added 2 new operators, CT1 END Carlos and CT1 DVS Arujo. After investigating several shipping options, they decided that all 15 team members will carry equipment and antennas as checked baggage at considerable cost. Donations to defray these costs may be made on their website. They will have 6 stations in all, 160 through 12 in 10-meter CW sideband and digital modes, plus 6-meter FM, VHF EME, and the QO100 and other satellites. Their detailed QSL policy is at www.s9z.org. They are also providing opportunities for youth mentoring, and their team includes KJ7 KOJ Angus, who at age 16 is already a noted DXer and contester. The full Dateline DX Association news release is available at their website, and you can check on s9zulu.org. And I know some of those guys. We did a podcast with them, and it's going to be a tremendous DXpedition. PX0FF, the DXpedition to Fernando de Noronha, continues to provide daily updates on its QRZ page. Most recently, they've had to cut short their 160-meter operation. By this time, however, they should be QRV on RIDI, so good luck with that. We are receiving frequent updates on the C21 Mickey Mouse DXpedition to Nauru and sharing them in regular and special editions of the Daily DX. You can follow them on Clublog Livestream. News and pictures are also being published on their website. 5 Hotel 8 Hotel Zulu in Tanzania by TA18Z Tefik is likely, as he hopes to, quote, be moving once more down to Tabora. He hopes to work on his DXCC awards for 40, 30, 12, and 10 a bit more, with other bands already done. As he looks for all-time new ones for himself, he expects to do same-day LOTW, EQSL, QRZ, and Clublog confirmations. And Tefik, if you need Ohio on any band, I'm more than happy to help Tanzania. So since we're in the neighborhood, Amateur Radio DXpeditions will be conducted at V55 LA, Namibia, October 30th to November 11th. They say that they will also have as many as 7 stations and will focus on CW, sideband, and digital modes on the lower bands. QSL using M0OXO OQRS with the full LOTW upload on a 6-month delay. The VU4 X-Ray DXpedition to Andaman and Nicobar Islands, March 10th to the 21st of 2025, is pending but not confirmed, they say. There will be 12 operators and 6 stations. They will have Elecraft K3 radios, expert amplifiers, and a pair of hex beams, a VDA, and LB verticals. I'll give you more information on their website and QSL routes as that gets closer. I'm really excited about that one. I just recently worked Lakshadweep, but I do need Andaman and Nicobar, so I can't wait, and I hope you'll be looking for it too. So here's something that I think if you are a young operator or you know a young DXer, you should get them involved in this. The 5th annual Dream Rig Youth Essay Contest, hosted by the Intrepid DX Group, is underway. Intrepid DX Group is a U.S.-based nonprofit organization which promotes amateur radio activities around the world. One of its annual endeavors is the Dream Big Youth Essay Contest, to gather the views and ideas of young people involved in amateur radio in the U.S. and Canada. So U.S. and Canadian license holders age 19 or younger who live in the U.S. or its territories should submit a 2-page essay answering the question, quote, "What do you see as ham radio's place in society? How can it benefit our society and at the same time become attractive to others your age?" End quote. The essay must be emailed or mailed by November 30th, and you can search on the Intrepid DX Group. Winners will be announced on December 15th on the Intrepid DX Group website and Facebook page. Prizes include an ICOM IC7300, ICOM AD5110 dual-band mobile radio with D-Star, and an ICOM IC-T10 dual handy-talkie. Address questions to me, the DX Mentor at gmail.com, and I will make sure that it gets through. If you are someone who likes podcasts and or YouTube episodes, the DX Mentor has new podcasts, YouTube segments for you to review. The first is with the previously mentioned S9Z DXpedition to São Tomé and Príncipe. The second is the upcoming 3 Delta 2 Yankee DXpedition to Rotuma. You can check them out on YouTube or wherever you get your podcasts by searching for the DX Mentor. A recap of the DXpedition to 9 Mike 1 Zulu, Malaysia, will be dropped this weekend. And that one is interesting because there is a, quote, hint about plans for a DXpedition to Spratly Islands. Spratly's only been on once in my 50 years of DXing, so I'll probably take off work for that one. Until next week, this is Bill, AJ8B Stroke 4, and I'll be back to AJ8B next week saying 7-3, and thanks to my ex-whale Karen for her love and support. I hope to see you in the pile-ups.
You're listening to This Week in Amateur Radio, available worldwide as a podcast from our web at www.twiar.net.
Welcome to the 18th segment of Ham Radio History, a century of amateur radio. Ham's Organizations, Events, Inventions. I'm Will Rogers, K5WLR. Our thanks go out to Chris Cadella, W2PA, for the use of his website in the presentation of these programs. Now, here is the next chapter of Ham Radio History. The Lid. As it seemed ever more likely that the U.S. might enter the war in Europe, radio amateurs speculated about their own role. Referring to it as the disturbance, a late 1916 QST editorial noted that the President had activated the National Guard and that Signal Corps units had been particularly prominent in the call-up. One Connecticut amateur, David Moore, 1ZZ, a member of his state's unit and one of the original governors of the ARRL, related his experience. The attitude of the government, particularly the Army, is that we amateurs are all right as far as we go, but the trouble is we are all located in the big cities where the machinery of civilization is fully developed and at hand. The telephone and the telegraph are at hand, and only in extraordinary emergencies could they see where we could be of use. This is surprisingly similar to views you hear today about the utility of amateur radio in the age of satellites, cell phones, and the Internet. He went on to say that if hams were able to situate stations in remote areas with no infrastructure, they'd be exactly what the government needed, a foreshadowing of Field Day and many emergency operations to come. The editor continued to describe portable sets and called upon amateurs to fill the extraordinary need for operators in the Signal Corps. At a junior encampment in Plattsburgh, New York, which later became the Army's Officer Candidate School, 3,500 servicemen from across the country were assembled that fall, including a number of radio amateurs. Though not explained, this seems to refer to a military preparatory or training event. One of them, L.S. Summers, Jr., 3AFE, was relaxing along a roadside enjoying a rest period during a long training march. He absent-mindedly blew a CQ using a blade of grass between his thumbs and was immediately answered by 5 other members of the H Company, 14th Regiment, who were within earshot. They formed a group that same day and would frequently get together to discuss radio. The Army did not quite yet grasp the potential of the amateurs already embedded within its ranks, but soon would. In February 1917, as the United States officially broke off diplomatic relations with Germany, QST opened a Department of Defense conducted by Edgar Felix for discussing national security and defense-related activities for radio amateurs. QST columns were then and are still called departments. Relaying naturally took center stage. A national relay system could be set up with volunteers assigned to 15-minute blocks of time twice per month, where they would commit to be on the air to handle messages in time of war. Its effectiveness would depend primarily on the discipline of members in meeting their assigned on-air schedules. The idea was compared with how the French had recently used Boy Scouts to carry messages and help their nation in other ways after it mobilized. It was also compared to other events from history, the runners of ancient Greece, Paul Revere's Ride, and the Cannonade, as it was called, used to announce the completion of the Erie Canal in 1825. By firing a succession of cannon along the canal's length and down the Hudson River, the news of its opening was carried from Buffalo to New York in about 90 minutes, an audio frequency relay. Message relaying had always been all about spanning greater distances and the challenge of the game. But now the ARRL intended to demonstrate to the government that the relay system could also be used for public good in times of crisis. QST went so far as to assert, and correctly it turned out, that the outcome of trunk line tests would determine whether or not the League would be shut down in time of war. The final March editorial posed the big question on everyone's mind. If the country went to war, would amateurs be permitted to continue operating? The answer quickly became clear. The April editorial declared it a near certainty that if war came, amateurs would be off the air for transmitting and probably receiving too. Nevertheless, the League held out hope that certain stations that were deemed useful would be called upon to continue operating, but that would depend on the availability of operators and stations, their willingness to keep constant operations going, multi-operator at one station, and in any case would probably only be allowed to receive. For the rest of the amateurs, QST recommended making good use of the idle time by studying the radio art. ARRL and QST would not be closed up. The magazine could serve as the main vehicle for amateurs to keep in touch. This turned out to be wishful thinking. Despite the threatened shutdown, the ARRL was poised for expansion. Such was the momentum in amateur radio at the war's onset. By the 3-year anniversary of its founding, the League had grown beyond the capacity of a few people, mostly just Maxim and Tuska, to keep things running. On 28 February, 6 members of the League's leadership from Connecticut and New York met at the Engineers Club in New York City to work out restructuring the organization for the expected growth. Some had never before met in person. After getting used to looking at instead of listening to each other, they drew up a constitution, elected an initial set of directors and 6 division managers to supersede the trunk line managers. The elected officers were Hiram Percy Maxim, 1ZM, President, Arthur A. Hebert, 2ZH, Vice President and General Manager, Clarence D. Tuska, 1ZT, Secretary, C.R. Runyon, Jr., 2ZS, Treasurer. The rest of the Board of Direction consisted of J.O. Smith, 2LK, later 2ZL, R.H.G. Matthews, 9IK, John C. Cooper, Jr., Frank M. Corlett, 5BJ, later 5ZC, W.H. Smith, 9ZF, Howard C. Seaford, 6EA, Victor F. Camp, H.L. Stanley, W.T. Frazier, 8VX, W.T. Gravely, 3RO, T.E. Gady, 3WN, and Miller R. Hutchison, J. Smith, Atlantic, Cooper, East Gulf, Matthews, Central, Corlett, West Gulf, W. Smith, Rocky Mountain, and Seaford, Pacific, also were the respective division managers. For several of them, this was simply a change of title. They, in turn, would appoint district superintendents who would appoint assistants. The entire group, many in their 20s, would then comprise the operating department of the ARRL, with General Manager A.A. Hebert, 2ZH, in charge of the League affairs. Headquarters would be in New York City, with a mailing address at 50 Church Street, his business address. A picture of the Board of Direction meeting appeared in May QST along with the new Constitution in its entirety and a map of the divisions. The Constitution stated that the organization's objective, Section 1, Paragraph 2, shall be the promotion of interest in radio communication in such subjects as are allied thereto, and in the relaying of messages without charge. Membership, Section 2, Paragraph 1, would be open to anyone interested or engaged in radiotelegraphy or telephony, perhaps also implying that one could be engaged but uninterested, and that was just fine too. Together, the President, Vice President, General Manager, Secretary, Treasurer, and Division Directors constituted the Board of Direction, which would be the League's primary governing body, with the President as its chairman. Amendments to the Constitution could be adopted by a 2/3 vote of the Board, except for changing the headquarters location, which would require a 4/5 vote. A life membership was offered for $25. Regular dues were $2. A quick break for identification purposes. You're listening to This Week in Amateur Radio. I'm Will Rogers, K5WLR. Normally, such a major restructuring would have received top billing in QST, but on the May's issue cover, a red banner declared it to be the war number. A full-page announcement opposite the table of contents began, "War measure," and "We are at war. Amateur wireless is at a standstill. Our stations are closed." Although the circulation was continuing to increase, the number of pages would be decreased to make up for the loss of advertising revenue. An order from the Department of Commerce Navigation Service Office of Radio Inspector addressed to all radio experimenters was mailed to all licensed amateurs and reprinted in QST. It ordered the immediate cessation of all operation, both transmitting and receiving as feared, but went even further to require the disabling of all equipment and lowering and disconnection of all antennas. An enclosed blank to be used to indicate compliance was demanded from radio amateurs under threat of rigid investigation. The order was signed by the District Communications Superintendent and unidentified Navy lieutenant. The QST editor lamented, "Every amateur station is closed down. The lid is on and clamped tightly for a period of time, the duration of which no man knows. All amateur traffic is halted where it happened to stand. All plans for improvements are canceled. All the plans of our manufacturers are in midair. In short, the great amateur wireless advance in these United States is stopped." At the same time, however, the military had an acute and immediate need for radio operators and no time to train new ones. There was no question about what the estimated 6,000 amateurs should be doing after being put off the air. Nearly 4,000 eventually served, contributing to the Navy's staff of radiomen, which grew from just under 1,000 to nearly 7,000 by the war's end.
The ARRL Board of Direction responded by passing a resolution to offer the full support of the organization and its more than 3,000 members to the U.S. government. It would provide operators and equipment and, holding out hope for some way to operate, was prepared to undertake the organization and direction of a systematic plan to eliminate the operation of secret illegal wireless plants, which will be used to supply the enemy with traitorous information. The lead editorial that month was a call for enlistment into Navy and Army radio operations. For weeks, the Navy had been appealing for radio operators to enlist or join the reserve. Maxim and General Manager Hebert were asked by the authorities to help recruit amateurs to man and equip Coastal Patrol stations as receiver operators. This editorial was the result. They were acknowledged by the Director of Naval Communication in the next issue. Amateurs could enroll in this service, working 6 hours per day for the duration of what was now being referred to as the German War. They would get a $60 uniform allowance, at least $30 pay per month depending on ability, and $1.50 for subsistence until quarters could be provided. This amounts to roughly $1,100, $550, and $27 respectively in 2013 currency. The anticipated demand for radio equipment was so great that the Navy asked the League whether its members would provide it with equipment for fair value. The matter would be left up to the individual members. Accordingly, the war was expected to quickly prompt a significant expansion of radio-related manufacturing. With many amateurs selling their gear to the military, there would also be a huge demand later, and amateurs anticipated a tremendous improvement in their stations when the war eventually ended. Perhaps a silver lining in the pervasive storm clouds of spring 1917. As summer, the perennial period of increasing static and decreasing on-air activity even without the ban, approached, the editor noted that the volume of message traffic had nevertheless grown tremendously and had been extending later into the season. In fact, before the shutdown, this was the first time that March had ever been the heaviest traffic month. He then turned philosophical. Every once in a while, one of you fellows writes in a letter and tells us about the feeling of intimate acquaintance and friendship which he feels toward everybody concerned in the ARRL. It always warms the cockles of our heart and inspires us. Just why we wireless bugs seem to possess this brotherly feeling to a greater extent than other groups of people is not entirely plain. Sometimes we think it is because of the deeper and more abstruse problems which we have to face. We who are closely identified in the study of radio communication are brought very close to the wonders of nature. The great laws which govern all things and which we must always observe gives one a very much deeper regard for truth that comes to those who follow only the ordinary matters of life. The fact that we are troubled with the same things arouses a feeling of brotherhood. The fact that we appreciate one another's failures and successes bring us close together. The romance of sitting alone in a little out-of-the-way room among a lot of instruments and yet be in communication with congenial spirits in other distant and out-of-the-way little rooms is conducive to profound and reverent thoughts. The fun which bubbles over from so many of us and finds expression in QST is one of the interesting manifestations of the effect of our work upon us. He expressed a hope that amateurs would be returning soon, and that this same feeling would remain even when the number of hams grew tenfold in the future. Included in this material are quotes from the following: Uncle Sam's Wireless, editorial QST, August 1916, page 213. L.F. Summers, Plattsburgh Amateurs, editorial QST, October 1916, page 302. Department of Defense, QST, February 1917, page 20. War, editorial, QST, March 1917, page 29. If We Are Closed Up, editorial, QST, April 1917, page 26. An enlarged ARRL, QST, May 1917, page 7. War, QST, May 1917, page 3. Clinton B. DeSoto, 200 meters and down, the American Radio Relay League, Incorporated, 1936, page 52. Our Country Calls Us, editorial QST, April 1917, page 25. Big Demand Coming, editorial QST, May 1917, page 13. The ARRL Spirit, editorial QST, May 1917, page 16. With great thanks to Chris Cadella, W2PA, for the use of his website's materials, Ham Radio History, A Century of Amateur Radio, Ham's Organizations, Events, Inventions, I'm Will Rogers, K5WLR, reporting for This Week in Amateur Radio.
Russian state media company VGTRK, which owns and operates the country's main national TV and radio stations, was targeted in a massive cyber attack coinciding with President Vladimir Putin's birthday. The website of VGTRK, the all-Russian state television and radio broadcasting company, was not loading early on Monday, and its Rossiya 24 rolling 24 hours news channel was not available online. Online broadcasting and internal services are down, and even the internet and telephone are not working. It's going to take a long time to fix, one source said. Speaking in Moscow, Maria Zakharova, a spokeswoman for the Russian Foreign Ministry, did not say who was behind the attack but told reporters that Russian media has long since become targets. Moscow would raise the cyber attack in all international forums, including at UNESCO, the UN agency which promotes freedom of speech, Zakharova said.
We pause for stations along the network to identify. We are This Week in Amateur Radio, your amateur radio and technology news magazine of the air, available as a podcast on iTunes, Google Play, iHeartMedia, and Spotify.
Foundations of Amateur Radio. One of the unexpected benefits of this hobby is how it provides you with the ability to connect to others in ways that are not directly related to radio. Take, for example, Steve. Steve appears at unpredictable times and locations, been hunted by citizens and scientists, and unlike Steve's potential invisible cousin, the Proton Arc, has been photographed by aurora hunters many times. It looks like observations go back as far as 1705. In 2017, physics professor Eric Donovan saw some of these photos and got curious. Assisted with GPS coordinates from an aurora hunter in Alberta, Song Despens, Eric correlated the time and location, and it turns out that Steve was observed as a ribbon of gas 25 kilometers wide, 300 kilometers above Earth, with a temperature of 3,000 degrees Celsius by the European Space Agency SWARM, a constellation of magnetic field measuring satellites in orbit since 2013, and planned as a 4-year mission. So far it has almost managed 11 years. Steve? Yeah, it's not named after Stephen Hawking or Steve Martin. Rather, if you're seeing something unexplained, you might name it something less scary, like the hedge in the movie Over the Hedge. Steve was given a backronym, finding words after the fact. Strong Thermal Emission Velocity Enhancement. But I prefer Steve. The NASA team at Goddard Space Flight Center have adopted Steve, so it looks like a keeper. I would never have even stopped to read the recent article in the local news, let alone dig into the various publications, if it weren't for the notion that Steve is one of many phenomena affecting the ionosphere, and with it, our hobby. Here's another example. Vance, Kilo Victor 4 Papa, published a plan on kilovictor4papa.com outlining a $35 project that requires minimal soldering that makes any Android phone into a handheld radio for 2 meters. Using a radio module, a microcontroller, a short USB cable, antenna connector, antenna, and some sticky gel pads, Vance has come up with an open-source project and circuit board design that will get you on your way. He's even designed a 3D printable enclosure, so you don't have to scare your friends with a bare circuit board. Whilst the Android app is in beta, that is, not quite fit for human consumption, You'll need to drop an email to Vance to get in on the action. Source code is on GitHub. I came across this project after breakfast, reading the Y Combinator Hacker News, which features all manner of weird and wonderful projects, links and questions from all over the technology sphere. The post has expansive discussion on Vance's project, including thoughts on other ideas on how to do interesting things related to our hobby. Again, if it weren't for the fact that I'm already an amateur, I would never have taken more than a glance at this, and I would never consider that this was a doable project, let alone discover other amateur radio projects like Ham WAN and Arden, or the Amateur Radio Emergency Data Network. The point being that we as amateurs are often pigeonholed by society into the idea of obsolete, disconnected, and quaint. I'm here to tell you that our hobby has made me more alive than ever, more connected to others around me, more observant to electrical and physical phenomena, and if that makes me quaint, I'm okay with that. Also, while we're on the topic of being okay, Charles November Kilo 8 Oscar reached out and told me that after listening to me talk about FT8 and his Morse code achievements, he cracked up and then raised the stakes by pointing out that you can get on HF with CW, that's continuous wave or more commonly Morse code, for about $100, where a kit capable of SSB, single sideband or more generally audio, will likely set you back significantly more. His advice, which I cannot fault, get on the air, presumably to make some noise. I'm Ono, Victor Kilo 6, Foxtrot Lima, Alpha Bravo.
Defense officials in France have publicly praised an experiment in high-speed optical satellite communication that they hope will eventually become useful in the nation's military space strategy. The experiment resulted in successful space-to-Earth laser communications between a small ground station and Curinos, a nanosatellite launched late last year into low Earth orbit. It is yet another example of scientists exploring the use of optical waves as an alternative to using radio. The ground station was described as a white dome 4 meters in diameter with a telescope sticking out. It was able to track and receive transmitted data. The French Defense Ministry released a statement in September extolling the advantages of optical communication, which include speed, discretion, and independence from regulation that coordinate the use of radio waves. Even if the optical link can sometimes be perturbed by atmospheric turbulence, the Curinos satellite is able to circumvent them in order to achieve optimum transmission quality. The project is the result of a collaboration between France's Defense Innovation Agency and a small company known as Calabas.
The U.S. Air Force Military Auxiliary Radio System will be marking its 76th year with a special event from the 5th through the 11th of November. The celebration of Air Force Mars and its 76 years on the air is opened to licensed amateurs in all 3 U.S. classes. Operators will be using CW, SSB, and digital modes on 80 through 6 meters in the parts of the bands assigned to general and technician class licensees. Operations are identified by 10 geographic regions called communications wings. There will also be operators on the air from the Pentagon Mars Station in Washington, D.C., Schriever Space Force Base in Colorado, Hancock Field Air National Guard in New York, and Travis Air Force Base Mars Station in California. The Air Force Mars system was created to assist the U.S. military and civilian government with communications when needed.
It is time for AMSAT's satellite shorts from all over, and we begin this week aboard the International Space Station. 4 astronauts aboard the ISS are awaiting their return as mission managers monitor unfavorable weather conditions off the coast of Florida. The Crew 8 mission, which includes NASA astronauts Matthew Dominic, Mike Barrett, and Jeanette Epps, along with Roscosmos cosmonaut Alexander Grebenkin, is nearing its conclusion after 7 months in space. While they prepare for their journey home, the crew spent the week relaxing and engaging in pre-departure activities. A weather briefing occurred on Wednesday, October 16th at 11 a.m. EDT, assessing conditions for their splashdown. Mission managers are now targeting a new undocking time of no earlier than 3:05 a.m. EDT on Sunday, October 20th. Next up, following Hurricane Helene, T-Mobile and Starlink activated their satellite texting service in preparation for Hurricane Milton to ensure Florida residents could stay connected despite potential cellular outages. After the FCC granted emergency approval, the service enabled T-Mobile users to send and receive basic texts, including 911 messages, even if the network went down. Starlink's direct-to-cell satellites were also employed to send emergency alerts to all phones and carriers in the affected areas. Users could determine if their phone connected to a Starlink satellite by the presence of 1 to 2 bars of signal and the network name displaying T-Mobile SpaceX. The satellite service worked best outdoors or near windows, although users sometimes had to retry sending messages if they didn't go through on the first attempt. SpaceX has also delivered over 10,000 Starlink kits in response to Hurricane Helene as part of ongoing recovery efforts. And our final story in satellite shorts comes from SpaceX as the FAA authorized SpaceX to resume Falcon 9 flights on October 11th following a suspension caused by an upper stage anomaly during the Crew 9 mission on September 28th. The anomaly occurred when the Merlin engine burned 500 milliseconds longer than planned, resulting in re-entry outside its designated zone. SpaceX conducted an investigation, and the FAA approved their corrective actions, though neither disclosed specific details of the findings. A special exception has been made for the European Space Agency's Hera mission on October 7th, as it posed no public safety risk. With the issue resolved, Falcon 9 operations fully resumed on October 15th. SpaceX marked its return with a double Starlink mission, launching from both Vandenberg and Cape Canaveral on the same day.
Now, in our 25th year of service to the worldwide amateur radio community, you are listening to This Week in Amateur Radio.
Bruce Page, KK5DO, is here now with this week's AMSAT report. Bruce?
Thanks, John. This week we are at the AMSAT Symposium in Tampa. Some of the topics we will be hearing papers on are AMSAT UK payload on Jovian 1 CubeSat, CardSat, working QO100 from beyond the nominal footprint, AMSAT and ERIS over the past 40 years, MESAT-1 commissioning, Fox Plus update, CubeSat Sim update, as well as a paper on integration for education and research, automation and remote control of the interoperable radio system and the ISS, getting ready to receive ham TV from the ISS, and ERIS engineering update, ISS, lunar, and commercial activities. I will have more highlights next week. This is Bruce Page, KK5DO. Back to you, John.
And thanks, Bruce, for that report.
It is time once again for the Solar Weather and Propagation Forecast Report. Brought to us each week by solar prognosticator Tad Cook, K7RA, in Seattle, Washington. Key solar indicators were lower this week, with average daily solar flux down from 194.3 to 170.5. and average daily sunspot numbers declining from 129.3 to 127.7. On October 22, spaceweather.com reported, "The sun is taking a quick break. Solar maximum is hard work, just ask the sun. After flaring almost without pause for the past 10 months, the sun is taking a quick break. Solar activity has been low for the past 48 hours with no flares stronger than Category C. The quiet won't last. Solar maximum is expected to continue for at least another year. Flaring should resume shortly." NASA and NOAA announced in a joint statement on October 15, 2024 that a solar maximum is underway. This phase of the cycle may take 2 to 3 years to develop. For shortwave propagation, this implies that the regular openings of the shortest bands will continue at least through 2025, possibly longer. Looking ahead at the predicted solar flux for near term, it will be 200 on October 26, then 205 and 215 on October 27 through the 28th, then 220 on October 29 through the 31st, then 180, 185, 180 and 175 on November 1st through the 4th. Looking now at the predicted planetary A index for the near term, it will be 18 and 7 on October 26th and 27th, then 8 on October 28th and 29th, and hold steady at 5 on October 30th through November 10th.
In Radio Sport this week, 4 contests for you. October 24th, the RSGP 80-meter Autumn Series, single sideband and phone. October 26th and 27th, the CQ Worldwide DX contest, that's single sideband and phone. October 28th, the RSGB FT4 contest digital. And on October 30th, the UKE ICC 80-meter contest, that's CW. And remember, you can visit the ARRL contest calendar for more events and information. Upcoming section, state, and division conventions, November 2nd, the Wisconsin Aries Races Conference 2024, sponsoring the ARRL Wisconsin State Convention, Wisconsin Rapids, Wisconsin. November 2nd and 3rd, the Stone Mountain Ham Fest, sponsoring the ARRL Georgia State Convention, that's in Lawrenceville, Georgia. And on December 13th and 14th, that's the Tampa Bay Ham Fest, sponsoring the ARRL West Central Florida Section Convention, that's in Plant City, Florida. Also, remember to search the ARRL Hamfest and Convention database to find events in your area.
SpaceX is seeking approval for changes to Starlink that the company says will enable gigabit per second broadband service. In an application submitted to the Federal Communications Commission on October 11th, SpaceX claims that the requested modification and its companion amendment will enable the Gen 2 system to deliver gigabyte speed, truly low-latency broadband, and ubiquitous mobile connectivity to all Americans and the billions of people globally who still lack access to adequate broadband. SpaceX said it is seeking several small but meaningful updates to the orbital configuration and operational parameters for its Gen 2 space station authorization to improve space sustainability, better respond to evolving demand, and more efficiently share spectrum with other spectrum users. SpaceX also wants to lower the altitude of satellites at 525, 530, and 535 kilometers to 480, 485, and 475 kilometers altitude, respectively. The reconfiguration will increase the potential maximum number of orbital planes and satellites per plane while keeping the planned total number of second-generation satellites at 29,988 or less. The FCC has so far approved 7,500 Gen 2 satellites. SpaceX CEO Elon Musk wrote this week that the next-generation Starlink satellites, which are so big that only Starship can launch them, will allow for a 10-fold increase in bandwidth and, with the reduced altitude, faster latency. As for actual speeds in 2024, Starlink's website says users typically experience download speeds between 25 and 220 megabits per second, with a majority of users experiencing speeds over 100 megabits per second. Upload speeds are typically between 5 and 20 megabits per second. Latency ranges between 25 and 60 milliseconds on land and 100 plus milliseconds in certain remote locations. Another request would change the elevation angles of satellites to improve network performance, SpaceX said. SpaceX seeks to lower its minimum elevation angle from 25 degrees to 20 degrees for satellites operating between 400 and 500 kilometer altitude, SpaceX told the FCC. Reducing the minimum elevation angle in this way will enhance customer connectivity by allowing satellites to connect to more Earth stations directly and to maintain connections with Earth stations for a longer period of time while flying overhead. Meanwhile, upgrades to Starlink's Gen 2 satellites will feature enhanced hardware that can use higher gain and more advanced beamforming and digital processing technologies and provide more targeted and robust coverage for American consumers, SpaceX said.
A European spacecraft, along with 2 CubeSats, has launched to investigate the aftermath of NASA's first planetary defense mission, known as DART. The European Space Agency's Hera mission took off October 7th aboard a SpaceX Falcon 9 rocket from NASA's Kennedy Space Center. The mission aims to study the consequences of NASA's 2022 mission, which deliberately crashed a spacecraft into the asteroid Dimorphos, changing its orbit. The Hera mission, slated to arrive at Dimorphos and its larger companion asteroid Didymos in 2026, is expected to offer a detailed crash scene investigation, according to European scientists. NASA's DART mission has tested whether a kinetic impact or crashing a spacecraft into a celestial body at high speed could alter the object's trajectory. While neither asteroid poses a threat to Earth, Dimorphos was chosen for the experiment because of its size, which is comparable to asteroids that could potentially be hazardous in the future. Observations following DART's collision with Dimorphos in September revealed that the spacecraft succeeded in altering the asteroid's orbital period by about 32 to 33 minutes. However, many questions remain unanswered, such as whether the impact merely left a crater or completely reshaped Dimorphos. The Hera mission is tasked with solving these mysteries by providing detailed data on the structure and the composition of both asteroids, which will further refine planetary defense strategy. Hera is scheduled to reach the Didymos systems in late of 2026 after a mid-March 2025 flyby of Mars to gain the necessary momentum. During the flyby, Hera will test the suite of instruments and observes Mars moon Deimos, capturing data that will support Japan's upcoming Martian moon's exploration mission. Once Hera arrives at the Didymos system, it will spend 6 weeks conducting surveys of both asteroids, using a variety of instruments to study their shapes, masses, and thermal properties. Hera will also release 2 CubeSats, Juventus and Milani, to conduct more specific investigation. Juventus will use radar to probe the interior of Dimorphos, while Milani will study the mineral composition and dust environment of both asteroids. These CubeSats will communicate their findings to Hera and relay the data back to Earth, providing scientists with unprecedented insights into the double asteroid system.
You're listening to North America's premier amateur radio and technology news magazine of the air. We are This Week in Amateur Radio, distributed worldwide at twiar.net.
SpaceX successfully launched its 5th Starship vehicle on October 13, 2024, marking a milestone with the unprecedented recovery of the Super Heavy booster at the launch site. The mission, dubbed Flight 5 by SpaceX, lifted off from Starbase in Boca Chica, Texas at 8:25 a.m. Eastern Time. The launch represented a significant step in SpaceX's long-term goal of achieving rapid reusability for its massive Starship Super Heavy system. The key innovation in this test was the planned recovery of the Super Heavy booster, known as Booster 12. After liftoff, the booster performed a series of precise maneuvers to guide itself back to the launch site. The booster was caught by a pair of mechanical arms, often referred to as chopsticks, mounted on the launch tower. About 7 minutes after liftoff, the arms closed around the top of the booster, just below its grid fins, successfully completed the first ever catch of a returning booster. SpaceX officials expressed excitement over the achievement, which is critical for the company's vision of rapid reflight capability. The ability to land the booster directly on the launch pad and prepare it for another flight within days or even hours is a key component of SpaceX's goal to make space travel more efficient. I don't know what to say. Gwynne Shotwell, SpaceX president and chief operating officer, posted on social media along with a video of the landing, capturing the surprise and enthusiasm following the success. The mission's second stage, Starship, flew on a suborbital trajectory, reaching a peak altitude of 212 kilometers before re-entering the atmosphere. Unlike the booster, Starship was not intended to be recovered. It performed a controlled splashdown in the Indian Ocean, where it exploded several seconds after touchdown. SpaceX noted improvements to Starship's heat shield from previous flights, which allowed it to survive re-entry in better condition. The launch came just hours after the Federal Aviation Administration granted SpaceX an updated launch license. The revised license, issued after concerns about environmental impacts, allows SpaceX to conduct the next flight, Flight 6, without needing a new authorization. The changes to the license included adjustments to the areas where debris, such as the interstage ring, might land, and an analysis of sonic boom impacts from the returning Super Heavy booster. The environmental analysis, a requirement for the revised license, determined that there would be no significant impacts from the mission. However, SpaceX is still required to conduct monitoring and take measures to protect the local wildlife surrounding the Boca Chica site. The FAA granted SpaceX the ability to proceed with Flight 6 under the same conditions, but the company must comply with strict regulations, including submitting monitoring data and environmental reports.
NASA's highly anticipated Europa Clipper mission officially launched on Monday, October 14, 2024, embarking on a journey to explore Jupiter's moon, Europa. The spacecraft lifted off at 12:06 p.m. Eastern Time aboard a SpaceX Falcon Heavy rocket from Pad 39A at NASA's Kennedy Space Center in Florida. The launch, described by NASA commentator Daryl Nail as unveiling the mysteries of an enormous ocean lurking beneath the icy crust of Jupiter's moon, Europa, marks the beginning of an ambitious astrobiology mission. The Falcon Heavy's 27 first-stage Merlin engines roared to life as the rocket ascended, with the two side boosters detaching about 3 minutes into flight. Separation of the second stage occurred shortly afterward, and Europa Clipper was deployed on its interplanetary trajectory nearly an hour later. Mission Control successfully established communication with the probe, confirming that the spacecraft's solar arrays had deployed as planned, signaling a smooth start to its mission. Monday's launch faced a slight delay due to Hurricane Milton, which made landfall on Florida's Gulf Coast last week, forcing NASA to close Kennedy Space Center temporarily. Originally scheduled for October 10th, the launch was pushed back while teams secured Europa Clipper inside a SpaceX hangar near Pad 39A. This marked the 11th Falcon Heavy launch and only the second time the rocket has been used for an interplanetary mission. The Europa Clipper mission has faced a long and complex path to the launch pad. Initially, NASA intended to launch the probe using its Space Launch System, a powerful moon rocket still in development in the mid-2010s. However, repeated delays in the SLS program, along with NASA's commitment to using the early SLS vehicles for its Artemis moon missions, forced the agency to opt for a more commercial alternative. A 2021 budget proposal allowed NASA to choose SpaceX Falcon Heavy, though the shift meant the mission's journey to Jupiter would take nearly 6 years instead of 3. At the heart of the mission is Europa, a moon thought to harbor a vast subsurface ocean beneath its icy crust. Europa has long intrigued scientists as one of the best places in the solar system to search for signs of life. However, NASA emphasizes that Europa Clipper's mission is not to find life directly, but to assess the moon's habitability. The spacecraft, carrying a suite of 9 science instruments, will study the composition of Europa's ocean, investigate its icy shell, and look for any signs of recent activity. After a journey of nearly 6 years, Europa Clipper is expected to enter orbit around Jupiter in April 2030, where it will begin an extended series of flybys of Europa. Over the course of its mission, the probe will make close passes to the moon, gathering data that could inform future missions, including a potential lander. The mission is set to conclude in 2034, with NASA planning to crash Europa Clipper into Jupiter's moon Ganymede to avoid contaminating Europa's pristine environment.
Young radio amateurs throughout the north of Africa enjoyed the weekend sub-regional camp of youngsters on the air with the support of a grant from the Yasmi Foundation. The grant to the Association of Tunisian Radio Amateurs was announced on the Foundation website 5 days before the camp itself got underway on October 18th. This is the second year that International Amateur Radio Union Region 1 YOTA has been able to organize an African sub-regional camp. This year's participants included 2 youngsters each from Mauritania, Morocco, Egypt, Libya, and Algeria. Young hams were also joined by members of the Tunisian Scouts, who were very familiar with the location as a well-used international scout camp facility. Organizers said that the inclusion of scouts this year will allow the hams to expand their own network even more. Camp activities include building antennas, fox hunting, solving problems, and, of course, getting on the air.
Congratulations are in order for software developer Skylar Erie and Zero GIS, who has joined the team at Amateur Radio Digital Communications as its new Director of Technology. Announcing his arrival on their website, ARDC called Skylar uniquely qualified for the post because of his long history in open-source software development, ham radio and wireless technology, and engineering management. He has been a licensed ham since 2011 and is a former member of the Auxiliary Communications Service in San Francisco, California, which operates in times of crisis. Skylar is the co-author of Mapping Hacks, published in 2005 by O'Reilly Media. The book explores the potential held by free and open-source geographic information systems. In Sonoma County, California, he was able to establish a cooperative that helped bring high-speed internet access to a rural community living in the coastal hills.
You're listening to This Week in Amateur Radio, available worldwide as a podcast from our web at www.twiar.net.
Hi, I'm Terry Saunders, N1KIN, one of the anchors for This Week in Amateur Radio, and I have a few questions. Do you have a good radio voice? Do you have a quiet recording space, own a professional broadcast microphone and DAW software, and know how to use them? Can you commit to a same-day turnaround when given a script assignment? If you answered yes to all of these questions, and you're willing to volunteer your time to give a little something back to the ham radio hobby, then lend us your voice and join our anchor team for This Week in Amateur Radio. To learn more and see if you have what it takes, contact George Bowen, W2XBS, via email at w2xbs77@gmail.com or look him up on qrz.com.
And wrapping up our news this week, the city of Auckland isn't just home to the most people in New Zealand, it is also where you'll find the most volcanoes, 53 to be exact. The region, known as the Auckland Volcanic Field, has inspired radio amateurs to launch a new program called Volcanoes on the Air. Although some hams have already had a jumpstart in calling CQ from the volcanic region, the QSOs begin in earnest with the official kickoff of the program on November 3rd. The website, ontheair.nz, has been updated to provide information for the new Volcanoes on the Air award scheme. The site also contains details on a variety of other programs, such as HEMA, POTA, SOTA, Lighthouses, and IOTA. An announcement on the info line of the New Zealand Association of Radio Transmitters encourages hams to give it a try, noting that the activity does not require a lot of hiking uphill. The website geo.net notes that the volcanic field is mostly utilized for public parks and recreation, and the volcanoes are considered unlikely to have any eruptions, especially since the last one on record was at least 600 years ago. So, the only things active in this volcanic field are likely to be the radio amateurs themselves calling CQ.
This Week in Amateur Radio is heard all around the world on the amateur bands, and on great repeater systems like the KB3 CNN Gateway FM Association repeater, on 146.730 MHz every Tuesday evening at 7:30 p.m., covering the wide area of western Pennsylvania, Ohio, and West Virginia. If your repeater system carries This Week in Amateur Radio, let us know via email, and we will mention your station in an upcoming edition. Send your information to w2xbs77@gmail.com.
Many of the news and information items heard in this edition of This Week in Amateur Radio have been provided by the American Radio Relay League, the ARRL Audio News Service, and the ARRL Letter, AMSAT, the Radio Amateurs of Canada, the Shortwave Listening Post, the Federal Communications Commission, the Radio Society of Great Britain, and Ofcom, the South African Radio League, the International Amateur Radio Union, the Wireless Institute of Australia and the Australian Communications and Media Authority, the New Zealand Association of Radio Transmitters, the Amateur Radio Newsline, the Rain Hamcast, Eric Guth, 4Z1UG and QSO Today, QRZ.com, the International Telecommunications Union, the 425DX News, Parks on the Air, and the Soda Reflector, and various news sources on the Internet.
With special thanks to all our weekly news sources and to you, our listeners, that wraps up this edition of This Week in Amateur Radio. If you'd like to write to us, you can find everything you need, including archive editions of the news service, at our website at twiar.net. And now, for all of us at This Week in Amateur Radio headquarters and our news team around the world, this is Chris Perrine, KB2FAF, wishing you a 73.